Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the EDF Ranger, staring at the strange message that had just arrived. The holographic display showed symbols and words he had never seen before. His communication officer, Danny Wright, looked worried as he tried to make sense of the transmission. "Captain, this message came from something called the Galactic Court of Justice," Danny said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "They want us to appear before a judge on Kepler Station. Something about a territorial dispute in the Epsilon sector." Jake frowned. 3 years ago, humans had made first contact with alien species and joined something called the Galactic Alliance. Since then, Earth ships had been exploring space and meeting new races, but this was the first time anyone had summoned them to court. "Get Lieutenant Amy Chen up here," Jake ordered. "We need our legal officer to look at this." Amy Chen arrived, on the bridge within minutes. She was a smart woman who had studied both Earth law and what little they knew about galactic law. Her dark eyes scanned the message quickly and her face grew serious. "Captain, this is real," she said. "The Galactic Court handles disputes between different species. They say we violated some kind of boundary agreement near the Epsilon sector." Jake remembered that area. 2 weeks ago, his ship had rescued a damaged cargo vessel there. The ship belonged to traders from Earth and they had been attacked by pirates. Jake's crew had driven off the pirates and saved the traders. He thought they had done a good thing. "What kind of trouble are we in?" Jake asked. Amy shook her head. "I don't know. Galactic law is very different from Earth law. We have to go to Kepler Station and face this judge. If we don't show up, they could ban all Earth ships from that part of space." Jake sighed and turned to his crew. Chief Engineer Pete Johnson was checking the ship's systems. Security Chief Lisa Martinez was cleaning her weapon as she always did when she was nervous. These people trusted him to keep them safe. "Set course for Kepler Station," Jake ordered. "Let's go see what this is all about." The journey to Kepler Station took 3 days. During that time, Amy tried to teach the crew about galactic law. She explained that hundreds of different alien species belonged to the Galactic Alliance. Each species had its own customs and rules. The Galactic Court was supposed to keep peace between them all. "The important thing is to be respectful," Amy told them. "We're still new to this. Many alien species have been part of the Alliance for thousands of years. They know the rules better than we do." When they arrived at Kepler Station, Jake was amazed by what he saw. The station was enormous, bigger than any city on Earth. Ships from dozens of different worlds were docked there. Some looked like metal, insects, others like crystal flowers. The variety was incredible. A shuttle came to escort them to the station. The pilot was an alien that looked like a tall, thin tree made of crystal. Its voice sounded like wind chimes when it spoke. "Welcome to Kepler Station, humans," the pilot said. "I am Alliance Liaison Officer Kethmora. I will guide you to the courthouse." As they walked through the station's corridors, Jake noticed something strange. Other aliens seemed to avoid them. A group of blue-skinned creatures quickly moved to the other side of the hallway when they saw the humans coming. A family of small, furry aliens pulled their children closer and whispered to each other. "Why is everyone acting so weird?" Lisa Martinez asked quietly. Kethmora's crystal body seemed to dim slightly. "Your species has developed quite a reputation in the 3 years since joining the Alliance," the alien said carefully. "What kind of reputation?" Jake asked. "We will discuss this later," Kethmora replied, but Jake could tell the alien was uncomfortable. They reached the courthouse, which was a massive building in the center of the station. The architecture was unlike anything on Earth, with flowing curves and strange angles that seemed to change as you looked at them. Inside, the ceilings were so high they disappeared into shadows. Kethmora led them to a waiting room outside the main courtroom. Through the transparent walls, Jake could see other species waiting for their own cases. Most of them looked nervous, but when they saw the humans, they looked terrified. "What is going on?" Amy whispered to Kethmora. Before the alien could answer, a door opened and a court official appeared. This creature was short and round with 6 arms and skin that changed colors like a mood ring. It spoke in a high, squeaky voice. "The human delegation will now enter the courtroom," it announced. "Please follow all security protocols." As they walked toward the courtroom doors, Jake saw something that made him stop in shock. Standing next to the entrance was the largest, most heavily armed creature he had ever seen. It wore thick armor that covered its entire body. Energy shields glowed around its arms and legs. Weapons that looked like they could destroy a small building hung from its belt. "That's the Bailiff," Kethamora explained quietly. "Court security." "Why does he need so much armor for a legal hearing?" Lisa asked. Kethamora's crystal body flickered with what Jake was beginning to recognize as nervousness. "Special security. Measures have been put in place for all Earth-related cases." The courtroom was huge, with seats for hundreds of spectators. Most of the seats were empty, except for a few aliens who watched from the very back rows as far from the humans as possible. At the front of the room sat the judge's bench, which looked more like a throne than a desk. Judge Zektari was an impressive sight. The alien had 6 arms, each ending in delicate finger-like appendages. Its skin was purple and seemed to shimmer in the courtroom's strange lighting. Multiple eyes moved independently, allowing it to look in several directions at once. "Welcome, humans of Earth," the judge said through a translation device. "I am Judge Zektari of the Vorthan Confederation. We are here to discuss the incident in the Epsilon sector." Jake stepped forward. "Your Honor, I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the EDF Ranger. We're here to answer your questions." The judge's multiple eyes focused on Jake, and he felt like he was being examined under a microscope. Several of the judge's arms moved nervously, tapping against the bench. "Before we begin," Judge Zektari said, "I must ask why you humans always insist on standing so close to the bench. Please remain at least 10 meters away during these proceedings." Jake looked around, confused. He was standing in what seemed like a normal spot, the same place where lawyers probably stood in courts all over the galaxy. But he took several steps backward anyway. "Is this better, Your Honor?" Jake asked. The judge seemed to relax slightly. "Yes, that will do. Now let us discuss why your ship was in the Epsilon sector without proper authorization." As the hearing began, Jake noticed that the armored Bailiff never took its weapons off the humans. Amy tried to take notes, but every time she reached for her computer pad, the Bailiff's hand moved toward its weapon. Lisa had to keep her hands visible at all times, and Pete wasn't allowed to touch any of the courtroom's equipment. Jake began to realize that they weren't just in court to answer questions about the Epsilon sector incident. They were being treated like dangerous criminals, and he had no idea why. The judge asked about their rescue of the Earth traders, and Jake explained everything that had happened. They had followed standard rescue protocols and driven off the pirates using minimal force. No one had been seriously hurt, and they had saved innocent lives. But as Jake spoke, he noticed that Judge Zektari seemed more and more uncomfortable. The alien's 6 arms twitched constantly, and its multiple eyes kept darting between Jake and the heavily armed Bailiff. Something was very wrong here, and Jake was determined to find out what it was. 6 months earlier, on the planet Axiom Prime, Commander Steve Rodriguez walked into his first galactic courthouse feeling confident. He wore his best dress uniform and carried a briefcase full of documents. Behind him walked his team. Cultural. Attaché Nancy Foster, a small woman with bright eyes and quick smile, and translator Ben Clark, who had spent months learning alien languages. The courthouse on Axiom Prime was different from the one on Kepler Station. This one was built into a mountain, with walls made of smooth black stone. Strange plants grew from cracks in the walls, glowing softly in the dim light. The air smelled like flowers and metal. "Remember, this is just a simple trade dispute," Steve told his team as they walked through the halls. "Some Earth merchants had trouble with Centauri traders. We're here to make sure everything gets sorted out fairly." Nancy nodded and adjusted her jacket. She was excited to be part of humanity's first real court case in the galactic legal system. As cultural attaché, her job was to help humans understand alien customs and help aliens understand human ways. Ben checked his translation device one more time. The Centauri had their own language, and he wanted to make sure he understood everything correctly. "The case seems pretty straightforward," he said. "Our merchants delivered the goods on time, but the Centauri traders are refusing to pay." They entered a large courtroom with curved walls and a ceiling that looked like the inside of a shell. Strange blue lights moved across the walls like slow lightning. At the front of the room sat Judge Velnari of the Centauri Republic. Judge Velnari was an impressive sight. The alien looked like a giant octopus that had learned to sit upright. Its skin was dark purple with silver spots, and 8 thick tentacles moved constantly around its body. 2 large eyes, each the size of a dinner plate, stared down at the humans from a face that had no mouth they could see. "So the humans have finally arrived," Judge Velnari said through a speaker system. The voice was deep and wet, like someone talking underwater. "Let us get this waste of time over with." Steve felt a little insulted by the judge's tone, but he kept his expression calm. "Your Honor, we're here to represent the interests of Earth merchants in this trade dispute." The judge's tentacles waved dismissively. Yes, I know why you are here. The Centauri traders have explained everything. Your merchants delivered inferior goods and now want full payment. This court will not support such dishonest business practices." Nancy Foster shifted in her seat. She had read all the case files, and that wasn't what had happened at all. The Earth merchants had delivered exactly what was ordered, and they had done it 3 days early. The Centauri traders were trying to get free goods by claiming the quality was poor. "Your Honor," Steve said politely, "I believe there may be some confusion about the facts of this case. May we present our evidence?" Judge Velnari's large eyes rolled in what looked like annoyance. "What evidence could primitive newcomers like you possibly have that would interest this court? The Centauri have been part of the Alliance for over 2,000 years. They understand trade law better than your species ever will." Ben Clark's translation device started beeping softly. He was getting readings that didn't make sense. According to his equipment, Judge Velnari was using words that weren't being translated properly. The judge was being far more insulting than the translation made it sound. Nancy stood up slowly. "Your Honor, with respect, I think there might be a translation error happening here." The judge's tentacles stopped moving for a moment, and both large eyes focused on Nancy. "Translation error? Are you suggesting that this court's equipment is faulty?" "Not faulty," Nancy said carefully, "but maybe not picking up some of the cultural context of what you're saying. In human culture, we believe that all parties in a legal dispute deserve equal respect, regardless of how long they've been part of the Alliance." Judge Velnari made a sound like water going down a drain, which Ben's device translated as laughter. "Respect? You want respect? Your species discovered fire yesterday compared to the Centauri. You have no understanding of civilized behavior." The tentacles around the judge's body began moving faster, slapping against the bench with wet sounds. "This entire case is a waste of this court's valuable time. The Centauri traders are obviously in the right. The humans will accept partial payment for their inferior goods and be grateful for this court's mercy." Steve felt his face getting hot, but he kept his voice level. "Your Honor, we haven't even presented our evidence yet. How can you make a ruling without hearing both sides? Because one side consists of respected members of galactic society, and the other side consists of primitive newcomers who think they deserve special treatment," Judge Velnari said. The tentacles were now moving so fast, they looked like purple and silver ribbons. "This court has made its decision." Nancy Foster had been sitting quietly, but now she stood up again. Her face was calm, but Steve could see something in her eyes that he had never seen before. She walked toward the judge's bench with slow, measured steps. "Your Honor," Nancy said in a voice that was perfectly polite, "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." Judge Velnari's tentacles stopped moving. "Sit down, human. This court is finished with you." Nancy kept walking. The judge's bench was high above the courtroom floor, but there were steps leading up to it. Nancy climbed the steps one at a time, never taking her eyes off the judge. "Human, return to your seat immediately," Judge Velnari commanded. The alien's voice had changed from annoyed to worried. Nancy reached the top of the steps and stood next to the judge's massive chair. Judge Velnari was much larger than any human, probably weighing over 400 pounds. The alien's tentacles were as thick as Nancy's arms. "Your Honor," Nancy said quietly, "I want to make sure I understand your ruling correctly." Before anyone could react, Nancy reached down and gently but firmly grasped Judge Velnari around the middle. The alien made a surprised gurgling sound as Nancy lifted the massive creature out of its chair and held it at eye level. The courtroom went completely silent. Judge Velnari's tentacles hung limply, no longer moving at all. The alien's large eyes were wide with shock and what looked like fear. Nancy looked directly into those large eyes and spoke in a voice that was still perfectly polite, but somehow carried the weight of mountains behind it. Your Honor, in human culture, we have a saying, justice is blind. That means a judge should make decisions based on facts and law, not on who has been around longer or who they like better. We came here today expecting fair treatment under galactic law. She held the judge steady with one arm while gesturing, with her other hand toward the evidence table. We have contracts, shipping records, quality certificates, and testimony from neutral witnesses. All of this proves that our merchants fulfilled their obligations completely. Judge Velnari tried to speak, but only managed a weak gurgling sound. Nancy continued, We understand that humans are new to the galactic community. We're still learning your customs and laws, but we're not primitive and we're not dishonest. We're just people trying to do business fairly and honestly. She gently lowered Judge Velnari back into the chair and took a step back. Now, Your Honor, would you be willing to look at our evidence before making your final ruling? The judge sat frozen for several long moments, tentacles completely still. Finally, in a much quieter voice, Judge Velnari said, Yes, please present your evidence. Steve and Ben quickly set up their presentation, still in shock at what they had just witnessed. Nancy walked back to her seat as if nothing unusual had happened. She smiled at Steve and whispered, Sometimes you have to get their attention first. The rest of the hearing went smoothly. Judge Velnari examined all the evidence carefully and ruled in favor of the Earth merchants. The Centauri traders were ordered to pay the full amount they owed, plus penalties for filing a frivolous lawsuit. As they left the courthouse, Steve looked at Nancy with new respect. How did you lift him like that? He must have weighed 4 times what you do. Nancy shrugged. I work out a lot. Besides, he wasn't really that heavy. The gravity on this planet is lighter than Earth's. But as they walked back to their ship, none of them noticed the small recording devices that had captured everything that happened in the courtroom. By the next day, footage of Nancy Foster lifting Judge Velnari was being shown on news broadcasts across dozens of worlds. The galaxy had just gotten its first real look at human strength, and many species found it very disturbing. 3 weeks after the Nancy Foster incident, Captain Tony Miller received an emergency call while his ship was patrolling the Outer Rim territories. His crew aboard the Earth vessel Horizon included Science Officer Kate Johnson and Medical Officer Greg Adams. They had been exploring new trade routes when they detected a distress signal from a destroyed colony ship. The ship had been attacked by raiders and was breaking apart in space. Most of the colonists were dead, but the crew of the Horizon managed to save 17 survivors, including a small child who appeared to be only 5 years old. The child was unlike any species they had seen before. She had pale blue skin, large, silver eyes, and small ridges along her forehead. She didn't speak any language their computers could translate, but she seemed to understand that the humans were trying to help her. Medical Officer Greg Adams spent hours caring for the child. She was malnourished and scared, but physically healthy. She's been through something terrible, Greg told Captain Miller. The other survivors said her parents were killed when the raiders attacked. Science Officer Kate Johnson tried to identify the child's species using the ship's databases. After 2 days of research, she found a match. Captain, I think she's from a species called the Kethani. They're a peaceful people who live in small colonies on the edge of Alliance space. Captain Miller nodded. We need to get her back to her people as soon as possible. But when they tried to contact the Kethani government, they discovered a problem. The child's home colony had been destroyed in the same raid. Her extended family lived on a world controlled by the hegemony of Zephyr, a powerful alien government that had been causing trouble in the region. Before Captain Miller could arrange to return the child, his ship received an official message from the hegemony. They claimed the child belonged to their species, not the Kethani, and demanded that she be turned over to them immediately. That's impossible, Kate said, looking at the message. I've run genetic tests. She's definitely Kethani, not Zephyrian. Captain, Miller studied the hegemony's claim. Something didn't feel right about it. Greg, what's your medical opinion about this child? Greg's face was serious. Captain, I've examined her thoroughly. She shows signs of psychological trauma, but she's been responding well to care. If we turn her over to people she doesn't know and trust, it could set back her recovery significantly. The hegemony sent another message, this one more demanding. They insisted that the child was a Zephyrian orphan who had been illegally taken from their territory. They wanted the humans to deliver her to a hegemony facility on the planet Mordoon within 1 week. Captain Miller made a decision that would change everything. We're going to contest this in Galactic Court. If they want this child, they'll have to prove their claim legally. The hearing was held on Mordoon, in a courthouse that looked like it had been carved from a single massive crystal. Judge Mordoon of the hegemony presided over the case. The alien judge was tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished metal and eyes that glowed with their own light. Captain Miller brought his entire team to the hearing. Kate Johnson carried a briefcase full of scientific evidence, and Greg Adams had prepared detailed medical reports about the child's condition and needs. Judge Morden entered the courtroom wearing elaborate robes that seemed to be made of liquid, starlight. The alien moved with arrogant confidence, barely glancing at the human delegation as he took his seat. This case should be simple, Judge Mordoon announced. The hegemony has claimed custody of one of our own citizens. The humans will turn over the child immediately. Captain Miller stood up. Your Honor, we request the right to present evidence that this child is not Zephyrian. Judge Morden's glowing eyes focused on Captain Miller with obvious annoyance. Evidence? What evidence could primitive humans possibly have that would matter to this court? Kate Johnson opened her briefcase and began pulling out data tablets and scientific instruments. Your Honor, we have genetic analysis, medical records, and cultural identification markers that prove this child's true species. The judge waved a hand dismissively. This court does not need to see your crude human science. The hegemony has made its claim, and that is sufficient. Greg Adams stepped forward. Your Honor, may I present medical evidence about the child's current condition and her specific care needs? No, Judge Morden said flatly. This court is not interested in human opinions about Zephyrian medical care. Our facilities are more than adequate for our own people. Captain Miller felt his temper rising, but he kept his voice calm. Your Honor, with respect, shouldn't we at least examine the evidence before making a decision that affects a child's life? Judge Mordoon's metallic face twisted into what might have been a smile. Captain Miller, let me explain something to you. Your species has been part of the galactic community for barely 3 years. The hegemony has been a respected member of the Alliance for over 5,000 years. When there is a dispute between us, this court knows which side is more likely to be telling the truth. The judge leaned forward in his chair. Furthermore, humans have already shown that they cannot be trusted in legal matters. Just last month, one of your people physically assaulted a judge during a court proceeding. Your species clearly has no respect for galactic law or judicial authority. Kate Johnson had been listening to this exchange with growing frustration. She was a scientist who believed in facts and evidence, not prejudice and assumptions. When Judge Morden finished his speech, she stood up slowly. Your Honor, Kate said in a clear, steady voice, may I ask which specific laws you're using to make this ruling? Judge Morden looked surprised by the question. Laws? The law is clear. The hegemony has claimed the child. But which specific articles of galactic law support that claim? Kate asked. I'd like to understand the legal basis for your decision. The judge's glowing eyes narrowed. Young human, this court does not need to explain basic legal principles to primitive species. You would not understand even if I tried. Kate nodded politely. I see. Well, perhaps I can help clarify the legal situation for everyone in the courtroom. Without referring to any notes or documents, Kate began to speak. Her voice was calm and professional, like a teacher giving a lecture to students. Article 1247 of the Galactic Legal Code states that in custody disputes involving minor children, the Court must consider genetic evidence, cultural affiliation, and the best interests of the child. Subsection C specifically requires that all available scientific evidence be examined before a ruling can be made. Judge Mordoon started to interrupt, but Kate continued speaking. Article 1248 establishes the procedures for cross-species adoption and custody transfers. It requires proof of genetic relationship or formal adoption documents. Article 1249 covers emergency custody situations and states that temporary guardians must demonstrate they are acting in the child's best interests. Kate's voice never wavered as she continued reciting law after law. She quoted specific case numbers, precedent rulings, and cross-references between different sections of the legal code. She spoke for 20 minutes without stopping, covering everything from child welfare standards to interspecies custody procedures. The court reporter, a small, furry alien with 6 arms, was frantically trying to keep up with Kate's words. Judge Mordoon's legal advisors were checking their computer databases, and their expressions grew more and more worried as they confirmed that every word Kate spoke was accurate. When Kate finally stopped speaking, the courtroom was completely silent. She had quoted 247 different articles of galactic law, referenced 89 previous court cases, and cited 34 interspecies treaties. She had done it all from memory, without looking at a single document. Judge Mordoon stared at Kate with his glowing eyes wide. "How do you know all of that?" Kate smiled politely. "I spent the last 3 weeks studying galactic law, Your Honor. I wanted to make sure I understood the legal framework for this case." "You memorized the entire legal code in 3 weeks?" one of the judge's advisors asked in disbelief. "Not the entire code," Kate said. "Just the sections relevant to child custody, interspecies adoption, emergency guardianship, and judicial procedures. About 12,000 pages total." She turned back to Judge Mordoon. "Now, Your Honor, based on the legal precedents I just cited, I believe this court is required to examine our evidence before making a ruling. Would you like to see our genetic analysis of the child?" Judge Mordoon sat in stunned silence for several long moments. His legal advisors were whispering frantically to each other, checking and double-checking their databases. Finally, the judge spoke in a much quieter voice. The rest of the hearing proceeded according to proper legal procedures. Kate and Greg presented their scientific and medical evidence clearly and professionally. The genetic tests proved beyond doubt that the child was Kithani, not Zephyrian. The medical evidence showed that she was healthy and recovering well under human care. Judge Mordoon, following the exact legal procedures that Kate had cited, ruled that the child should remain with the humans until suitable Kithani guardians could be found. After the hearing, as they were leaving the courthouse, Captain Miller looked at Kate with amazement. "How did you really memorize all those laws?" Kate shrugged. "It wasn't that hard. Human brains are pretty good at storing and organizing." 2 months after Kate Johnson's impressive court performance, Trade Representative Carl Williams found himself facing the biggest legal challenge of his career. He sat in his hotel room on the planet Valdoria, preparing for a court case that could determine whether humans would be allowed to mine asteroids in the Outer Rim territories. With him were economic advisor Helen Davis, a sharp woman who understood galactic trade better than most aliens, and security escort Frank Thompson, a quiet man whose job was to keep the team safe during their travels. The case had started simply enough. Earth companies had discovered rich deposits of rare metals in asteroids that seemed to belong to no one. They had followed all the proper procedures, filed the correct paperwork, and begun mining operations. Then the Valdorian Empire had sued, claiming the asteroids were in their territory. "The problem is that Valdorian law firm," Helen explained as she reviewed their files. "Vextar and Associates has never lost a case against what they call lesser species. They specialize in intimidating opponents into giving up before the trial even starts." Carl nodded grimly. He had dealt with bullies before, but never in a galactic courtroom. "What do we know about their lead attorney?" "Counselor Vextar is considered one of the best lawyers in the galaxy," Helen said. "He's won over 300 cases in the last 50 years. His specialty is finding legal loopholes that smaller species don't understand. Frank looked up from his security reports. There's something else you should know. 3 of his previous opponents have disappeared after losing their cases. The authorities never found any proof of wrongdoing, but the pattern is suspicious. Carl felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about mining rights anymore. This was about whether humans would be allowed to compete fairly in galactic business or whether they would always be pushed around by more established species. The next morning, they entered the Valdorian Supreme Court, a massive building made of black marble with golden veins running through it. The courtroom was designed to make visitors feel small and unimportant. The ceiling was 5 stories high, and the judge's bench towered above everything else like a throne. Counselor Vextar was already there when they arrived. The Valdorian was impressive and frightening at the same time. He stood over 8 feet tall, with dark green skin that looked like polished leather. His head was crowned with sharp spines and his eyes glowed with an inner fire. When he smiled, he showed rows of needle-sharp teeth. "So the little humans have decided to show up after all," Vextar said in a voice like grinding metal. "How brave of you." Carl kept his expression neutral. "We're here to present our case, Counselor." Vextar laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your case? You mean your pathetic attempt to steal Valdorian property? This should be amusing." The judge, Lord Justice Colverine, entered the courtroom wearing robes that seemed to be made of shadow and starlight. Like Vextar, he was tall and intimidating, with the same sharp spines and glowing eyes. Carl realized this court would not be friendly to human interests. "Let us begin," Lord Justice Colverine announced. "The Valdorian Empire claims ownership of the Outer Rim asteroids based on ancient territorial rights. The humans claim salvage rights based on recent discovery. Counselor Vextar, present your case." Vextar stood and began his presentation with theatrical flair. He spoke of Valdorian history, of their ancient claims to the Outer Rim, of their superior understanding of galactic law. His voice filled the courtroom like thunder, and his gestures were dramatic and commanding. But as Carl listened, he began to notice something strange. Vextar's arguments sounded impressive, but they didn't actually prove anything. The lawyer was using big words and emotional appeals instead of facts and evidence. When it was Carl's turn to speak, he stood up calmly and walked to the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor, I'd like to examine the specific territorial claims that Counselor Vextar just presented." "You dare to question the word of a Valdorian legal master?" Vextar interrupted, his spines bristling with anger. Carl turned to face the tall alien lawyer. "I'm not questioning your word, Counselor. I'm asking to see the documents that support your claims." Vexatar's glowing eyes narrowed. "The Valdorian Empire does not need to prove its ancient rights to primitive species who arrived in this galaxy yesterday." "Actually," Carl said politely, "according to galactic law, all territorial claims must be supported by documented evidence. Would you please provide the registration numbers for your asteroid claims?" Vextar's spines began to quiver with rage. "How dare you make demands of—" "Me. I have been practicing law since before your pathetic species discovered space travel." Carl nodded respectfully. "I'm sure you have extensive experience, Counselor. That's why I'm confident you'll have no trouble providing the documentation I requested." The courtroom fell silent. Everyone was watching to see what Vextar would do. The tall alien lawyer looked around the room, his glowing eyes darting from face to face. "The documents are in the Imperial Archives," Vextar said finally. "They are too ancient and valuable to bring to a routine hearing like this." Carl smiled slightly. "I understand. Fortunately, I have copies right here." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I spent the last month researching Valdorian territorial claims in the Galactic Archives. These are certified copies of every asteroid registration filed by the Valdorian Empire in the last 1,000 years. He handed the folder to the court clerk. "As you can see, the Valdorians have never filed any claims for the asteroids in question. In fact, according to their own historical records, they believed that region of space was empty and worthless." Vextar's face turned a darker shade of green. "Those records are obviously forgeries. No human could understand Valdorian historical documents. Carl pulled out another folder. You're right that the original documents were in ancient Valdorian script. Fortunately, I found a translation guide in the archives. It was written by Valdorian scholars 300 years ago for use in interspecies trade negotiations. Hero opened the second folder and began reading. Quote, "The Outer Rim territories contain no resources of value and are too distant from our core worlds to be worth claiming. Future generations may find uses for these empty regions, but current imperial policy considers them beneath our notice." End quote. This is from an official Valdorian government report dated 847 Galactic Standard years ago. The courtroom buzzed with shocked whispers. Lord Justice Colvarin leaned forward in his chair, his glowing eyes fixed on the documents. Vextar's composure was cracking. Even if those documents are real, they don't prove anything. Laws change. Territories can be claimed retroactively. Carl nodded again. That's an interesting point, Counselor. Let me address that with evidence from your own law firm's previous cases. He pulled out a third folder, this one much thicker than the others. Over the past 50 years, Vextar and Associates has argued in 17 different cases that retroactive territorial claims are illegal under galactic law. In fact, you've built your reputation on preventing exactly this kind of legal manipulation. Carl began reading from case files. Quote from Vextar versus the Centauri Mining Consortium. Retroactive territorial claims violate the fundamental principles of galactic law and cannot be permitted by any honest court. End quote. He flipped to another page. Quote from Vextar versus the Hegemony Trade Alliance. Any species that attempts to claim territory after other parties have already established legal interests is engaging in theft disguised as legal procedure. End quote. Vextar was now visibly shaking with rage and fear. How did you get those files? Those are confidential legal documents. Carl's smile became broader. Actually, they're all part of the public record. Galactic court decisions are available to anyone who takes the time to look them up. I spent 2 weeks reading every case your firm has ever argued. He pulled out a fourth folder. Which brings me to some other interesting discoveries. Counselor Vextar, did you know that falsifying territorial claims is a serious crime under galactic law? The penalty is permanent disbarment and up to 20 years in prison. Carl opened the fourth folder and pulled out a stack of documents. I'm not suggesting anything, Counselor. I'm stating facts. These are records of bribes paid to court officials, falsified documents, and witness intimidation, all connected to cases handled by your law firm. He handed the documents to Lord Justice Colvarin. I've also prepared a detailed timeline showing how these illegal activities correlate with your firm's winning streak over the past decades. Vextar lunged toward Carl, his spines extended and his teeth bared. You lying human scum, I'll destroy you. But before the Valdorian could reach him, Carl stepped aside smoothly and continued speaking in the same calm, professional tone. I've also identified the 3 missing persons that Security Chief Thompson mentioned earlier. It turns out they're not missing at all. They're living under new identities on distant worlds, protected by the Galactic Witness Protection Program. Carl pulled out a final document. They've all agreed to testify about the threats and violence they experienced after losing cases to your firm. The courtroom exploded in chaos. Court security moved to restrain Vextar, who was screaming threats in ancient Valdorian. Lord Justice Colvarin was frantically consulting Woe. Back in the present, Captain Jake Morrison sat quietly as Judge Zektari finished explaining the security measures that now surrounded all human court cases. The heavily armored bailiff stood motionless nearby, but Jake could see the aliens, multiple eyes constantly watching the human delegation. Lieutenant Amy Chen had been taking notes throughout the judge's explanation. Her face showed a mixture of surprise and understanding as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. So let me make sure I understand this correctly, Your Honor, Amy said carefully. The special security measures aren't because humans are violent or dangerous. They're because of what happened in previous court cases. Judge Zektari's 6 arms moved nervously as he nodded. That is correct, Lieutenant Chen. The galactic legal community has had to adapt to certain characteristics that your species Displays in judicial settings. Chief Engineer Pete Johnson looked confused. What characteristics? We've been trying to follow all the rules and be respectful. The judge's multiple eyes focused on Pete, and Jake could see the alien struggling to find the right words. It is not a matter of respect or rule following. Your species possesses capabilities that most galactic courts were not designed to handle. Security Chief Lisa Martinez leaned forward. What kind of capabilities? Judge Zektari looked at the armored bailiff, who gave what might have been a reassuring nod. The judge seemed to draw courage from this and began to speak more openly. 6 months ago, a human named Nancy Foster physically lifted Judge Velnari during a court proceeding. Judge Velnari weighs over 200 kilograms, yet this small human woman handled him as if he were a child's toy. The judge's arms gestured toward Amy. 3 weeks later, another human named Kate Johnson demonstrated that she had memorized over 12,000 pages of galactic legal code in less than a month. She recited complex legal precedents from memory for nearly an hour without making a single error. Judge Zektari's voice grew quieter. 2 months ago, a human called Carl Williams exposed a corruption network that had existed for decades. His investigation brought down 17 judges, 43 lawyers, and caused the biggest legal scandal in galactic history. Jake began to understand why the other aliens in the courthouse had seemed so nervous around them. Your Honor, these all sound like good things. Nancy Foster stood up to corruption. Kate Johnson knew the law better than anyone else, and Carl Williams exposed criminals. Yes, Judge Zektari agreed, and that is precisely the problem. Amy frowned. I don't understand. How is following the law and fighting corruption a problem? The judge's 6 arms moved in what looked like a gesture of helplessness. Lieutenant Chen, do you understand what it means for a judge when a human enters their courtroom? No, Your Honor, please explain. Judge Zektari stood up from his bench and began pacing behind it, his robes flowing around him like water. When Nancy Foster lifted Judge Velnari, every judge in the galaxy realized that humans possess physical strength far beyond what most of us can match. We cannot intimidate you, threaten you, or physically control you. He stopped pacing and looked directly at the human delegation. When Kate Johnson recited our own laws better than our own legal scholars, every judge realized that humans can master our legal systems faster and more completely than species who have studied them for centuries. We cannot confuse you with complex procedures or hide behind legal technicalities. The judge's voice became almost a whisper. When Carl Williams exposed the corruption network, every judge realized that humans can see through deception and manipulation that we thought was invisible. We cannot fool you, bribe you, or trick you into accepting unfair rulings. Jake felt a strange mix of pride and concern. Your Honor, it sounds like humans are just good at seeking justice and fairness. Exactly, Judge Zektari said, and his tone suggested this was not entirely a compliment. Do you understand what this means for those of us who serve in the galactic legal system? Lisa Martinez spoke up. It means you have to actually follow the law instead of making biased decisions. Judge Zektari's multiple eyes all focused on Lisa at once. Yes, and for many judges throughout the galaxy, this is a terrifying prospect. Amy looked around the courtroom, taking in the heavy security, the nervous court officials, and the judge, who was clearly uncomfortable despite trying to be fair. Your Honor, are you saying that the galactic legal system was corrupt before humans joined? The judge was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke in a voice so low they had to strain to hear him. Not entirely corrupt, but flexible. Species, with more political power or longer alliance membership, often received more favorable treatment. Certain legal firms had unofficial arrangements with certain judges. Some decisions were made based on factors other than strict legal merit. Pete Johnson shook his head in disbelief. And nobody did anything about it? The system worked for most species, Judge Zektari explained. Smaller, newer species accepted unfavorable rulings because they had no choice. Larger, more established species got the outcomes they wanted. Everyone understood their place in the hierarchy. Until humans showed up, Jake said. Until humans showed up, the judge agreed. Your species does not accept unfavorable treatment simply because you are new to the Alliance. You do not back down when faced with intimidation. You learn our laws, better than we know them ourselves, and you use that knowledge to demand fair treatment. The judge returned to his seat and looked at the documents related to their case. The incident in the Epsilon sector, Captain Morrison. Your ship rescued Earth traders who were being attacked by pirates. The pirates were working for certain Alliance members who wanted to discourage human expansion into that region. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. So this whole case was designed to punish us for interfering with organized crime? Judge Zakatari nodded slowly. That was the intention. 6 months ago, I would have ruled against you regardless of the evidence. The political pressure would have been too great to resist. And now? Amy asked. The judge gestured toward the armored bailiff and the heavy security around the courtroom. Now I am forced to make my decision based purely on legal merit. The evidence clearly shows that your actions in the Epsilon sector were legal, necessary, and heroic. You saved innocent lives and stopped criminal activity. He picked up his ceremonial gavel. Therefore, this court rules in favor of the Earth delegation. All charges are dismissed, and Captain Morrison's actions are officially commended. As the gavel fell, Jake noticed that Judge Zakatari looked both relieved and terrified. The alien had done the right thing, but clearly wasn't comfortable with the precedent it set. After the hearing, as they walked back through the courthouse corridors, Jake noticed that the other aliens were still giving them wide berths. But now he understood it wasn't fear of human violence they were avoiding. They're afraid we'll make them be honest, Lisa observed quietly. Amy nodded. We're not scary because we're dangerous. We're scary because we're incorruptible. As they reached their shuttle, Jake turned back to look at the courthouse. Through the transparent walls, he could see other cases being heard. In every courtroom, he noticed the same heavy security, the same nervous judges, the same careful attention to proper legal procedures. Danny Wright, who had been quiet throughout the hearing, finally spoke up. Captain, do you think this is a good thing? I mean, forcing the whole galaxy to change their legal system because of us? Jake considered the question as their shuttle lifted off from Kepler Station. Below them, the massive courthouse complex stretched out like a small city. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species came here seeking justice, and now they would all be getting fairer treatment because humans refused to accept anything less. Danny, Jake said finally, I think fairness and honesty are always good things, even when they make people uncomfortable. Amy looked out the shuttle window at the stars beyond the station. I wonder what will happen next. If our reputation for being too good at justice spreads, it might change how other species interact with us throughout the galaxy. Pete smiled. Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing. If everyone knows that humans won't tolerate corruption or unfairness, maybe they'll think twice before trying to cheat us or anyone else. As the EDF Ranger departed from Kepler Station, Jake realized that humanity's role in the galactic community was becoming clearer. They weren't going to conquer the galaxy through superior technology or military might. They weren't going to win through clever diplomacy or economic manipulation. Instead, humans were going to transform galactic civilization simply by refusing to accept injustice and by being too competent for anyone to ignore. They would force the galaxy to live up to its own stated ideals, whether it wanted to or not. In courthouses across dozens of worlds, alien judges were learning to make decisions based on evidence and law rather than politics and prejudice. It was a small change in the grand scheme of galactic civilization, but Jake suspected it was just the beginning. The galaxy was about to discover that the most dangerous thing about humans wasn't their capacity for violence or their technological advancement. The most dangerous thing about humans was their stubborn insistence that everyone deserved fair treatment under the law, and there was nothing the galaxy could do to stop them.